Shalom, it's Rabbi David Barron with an important message that I'd like you to take to heart during these difficult times. It's a very troubled world, and many of us have been reacting to the onslaught of anti-Semitic comments, both in the streets by protesters and also in academia, in the halls of higher education. And many of us are deeply and profoundly troubled by this. We can't imagine how anyone would protest in favor of Hamas, the brutal murderers of men, women, and children who killed over 1,300 Israelis, many of them in their beds sleeping, and tortured them and raped women at a festival of music and love. And the actions were so outrageously brutal that these people deny that this occurred or can't even come to bring themselves for a moment to show some compassion, some rahmanas, and say, this is terrible, it's not what we believe in. There are many in the Arab world, and former Ambassador Dennis Ross said in confidential conversations he had with many leaders in the Arab world, that these kinds of monstrous people do not deserve to continue living, and that Israel should not, I repeat, should not declare a ceasefire. A humanitarian pause, perhaps, but a ceasefire, absolutely not. They have to root out this evil. You know, a lot of religious people get poked fun at by saying things like good and evil. But the truth is, we've come to realize, if history hasn't taught us this lesson, that there's great evil in the world and that we have to combat evil. Now, we don't have to put on the uniform of the Israel Defense Forces or go and send our sons and daughters into the tunnels to ferret out these horrific individuals who are holding our hostages and who are holding their own people hostage by planting themselves in tunnels directly underneath schools and mosques and hospitals, forcing Israel to bomb and to penetrate those spaces. They knew what they were doing. They planned this all along. They knew the reaction that Israel would have to an attack on its civilians. Forget about the rockets and the missiles. What country on earth would tolerate rockets and missiles endlessly being fired into its cities and villages? So we all have to take that stand and do what we can do. We're not putting on the uniform and going into the tunnels, but let me tell you, we have a battle that we have to be engaged in that's fought here in America on the streets of our cities. We have to say that those people who often are masked, if you notice in the protest rallies, they're masked because they don't want to reveal themselves. They have to be outed, and they have to be called out for the hypocrites and bigots that they are, because a lot of what they're claiming to be hatred of Israel is nothing less than anti-Semitism. And if you have any doubts, please go online and read a copy of the Hamas Charter. It calls for the destruction of the Jewish people and the destruction of the Jewish state. I've said many times, one of the elements that's at the heart of this conflict, my friends, is the refusal of the fanatical Islamic extremists to recognize a Jewish state. They have to accept the reality of Israel because it's militarily strong. But right now, we have to wage the battle in the minds and hearts of people, because if a lie is repeated frequently enough, some people will believe it. The gullible. We have to take the fight to academia, to the institutions of higher learning that are so corrupt and so biased that they can't even bring themselves to acknowledge what happened was a horrific act of terrorism. In fact, 100 Columbia professors who signed a letter actually said that it was just a military action. How preposterous and obscene that is. So we have a very important role to play. And I must tell you that I haven't experienced a lot of anti-Semitism in my lifetime, but this anti-Semitism that comes from the Islamic organizations and the extremist groups has to be countered. We have allies and friends in the Christian community, in the African American community, in the Asian American community, in the Latino community. We have to seek them out and engage them. They're our coworkers and friends, and they would not tolerate this kind of bigotry or hatred directed at them, nor will they seeing it directed against us. So we have that role to play. Stand up, be proud. We've got a rich heritage, and we've got a strong set of friends and allies who will rally to our side. Yes, the news media gives a lot of attention to these Arab protests in the United States, but the percentage of the population of the Arab American community in America that is actually actively engaged is rather small when you take it in terms of the entire population of this country. I'm so proud that our country stands with Israel, is against a ceasefire that would give Hamas a symbolic victory. And we have to continue to rally all of those who represent us in Congress and in the Senate and urge them to continue their support. So there's a role we can play by writing, by rallying. You know, we had over 1,000 people at that fantastic rally that we held for Israel that was on Wilshire Boulevard by the Federal Building. And on Tuesday night, here at our Temple Savant Theater, we're going to be holding a huge rally for Israel with visiting guests, honored guests, the family members of those who are being held hostage. We all have a role to play. And last but not least, prayer. Let's take a moment now and pray for the soldiers who are fallen and for the hostages who have been taken, and pray for their speedy return. Avinu Shebashamayim, Heavenly Father, watch over and protect the soldiers of the Israel Defense Forces. Guard them, keep them safe, enable them to return home to their families and loved ones, victorious at defeating a monstrous evil, a terrorist, psychopathic terrorist action that we'll never forget, October 7th. Dear God, help us to support one another and to seek out support from our neighbors and friends. Help us to remain strong and resolute in the face of bigotry and hatred. We ask that you give us the strength. And the Hebrew expression for giving strength is a beautiful one, so repeat it with me. Chazak, chazak, v'nit chazek. Let us be strong, and let us strengthen one another.